All right, everyone. My name is Pascal Borel, and I'm not talking to you from the Swiss mountain. I am in Switzerland, but I'm talking to you from Geneva today. I'm actually not talking, I'm reading as of today the book I have written named 2024. You will find it both in French and in English. I've written the book in both languages on Amazon, of course. And you will also find it on our website, www.forovet24.com. Totally free. It's available to you chapter by chapter. And following each and every chapter, you'll find a comment section, which I advise you to use in order to share, your criticism, as I always say, as a driving force of my personal growth. And I will be responding to most of the comments if you take the time and, if you have the commitment to share what you think about what I'm suggesting. The book 2024 is designed around the necessity to give you a roadmap that will restore their strength to democracies. We desperately need it because today they are totally dysfunctional, but proposing wars, conflict, economic catastrophes, uh, and so forth. They do nothing for you but stealing the value of your work through the various taxes that are piling up on top of each other and basically robbing you the value of your work. So, today I'm going to read to you the sources of revenue of states. And it's one of my preferred chapter. It's actually chapter 7. So we are on for chapter 7, sources of revenues of state. A few citations. If the government has unlimited access to your money, it will impose an unlimited dictatorship upon you. Unlimited money is the origin of all wars. A person who has the power to create money out of nothing will use that power for their own benefit to the detriment of everyone else. Creating money out of thin air is a great power to have. When power no longer fears the people, it opens the door to slavery. The revenues of states such as Switzerland, France, the United States of America, China, Russia, and indeed all governmental systems, whether democratic or dictatorial, are structured into 9 main categories. 1. Income tax, which can attain over 60%, but generally range between 15% and 40% of one's income. 2. Indirect taxes. For example, taxes on energy. Example, gasoline, which should cost dollar or euro, same thing nowadays, I would say 25 to 50 cent per liter, but which now cost almost 2 euros, i.e. almost 10 times more per liter, yielding more than 500% margin for the state, because everything that is taken on top of 25 cent a liter is of course taxes. Indirect taxes such as VAT, which applies to goods and services in most countries. It ranges between 6% and up to 30% plus for certain products. All other indirect taxes on alcohol, tobacco, cinema, restaurant, even clothes. The list of indirect taxes is nearly endless. 3. Inheritance taxes, which generally ranges from 30% to 40% of the value of the deceased estate. Even after fulfilling your social and fiscal duties throughout your life, the government prohibits you from passing on your wealth to your children without taking their cut. Is that fair? We'll see. 4. Wealth taxes, which bring between 0.1% and 4% of the value of your assets in question, depending on the circumstances, and which often costs more to collect than what is generated by the tax for the state, as in France, for example. 5. Property taxes, ranging from 0 to 50% depending on the type of property and the jurisdiction. These taxes generally force you to bear all property maintenance costs without reaping the benefits. In effect, these taxes deprive you of the majority of the fruits of your property ownership. 6. Capital gain taxes, which can attain up to 40% of your profits, even though you alone bore the risk of investing in stocks or in other financial products. Of course, the state takes its share when you win and gives you nothing back when you lose. 7. Inflation, or the erosion of money's value. It is the ultimate tax. It is the most unjust form of taxation because it penalizes small savers while preserving the wealthiest. Real estate owners and holders of capital in the form of securities, stocks, are not touched by this tax. If you had a sum of money representing $100 in purchasing power terms in 1920, it would be worth less than $1 today. It's a fact. To resolve crises, to meet their expenditure, to maintain the monetary system in place, states print money with the complicity of the central banks, thus devaluing your money and savings by 100 times in just over a century. 8. Political debt, also known as public debt. It is easy money for politicians who load each citizen with a debt equal to 100% of their annual productivity, sometimes even more, while leaving full control of the operation to the state. To avoid accountability and to make you feel guilty and responsible for this financial scam, politicians cleverly refer to this revenue source as public debt, when it is purely and simply a political debt. 9. Theft, pure and simple, as we also happened in Cyprus a few years ago, when the public authorities stole approximately 10% from all private bank accounts holding more than 100,000 in cash. Crazy. Lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can make numbers say anything by manipulating them according to the interest of the moment. However, from the citizen's perspective, the 9 states' revenue sources set out simply above, that I've just mentioned, are obvious. Depending on the method of calculation, states take at least 40%, but in the majority of cases, between 60 and 80% of the value of your work and of your assets. If you include the ultimate tax, the hidden tax, known as inflation, some might argue that the states actually steal 99% of the value of your money and or monetary assets over the course of a century. The tragic part is that those that argue this are correct. There is no counter-argument, nothing to contradict this. No royal family, no dictatorship, no regime, however severe, has ever achieved such a feat in the history of mankind. With your complicity, I'm sorry to say, our social democracies make it acceptable to siphon off the wealth produced by the citizens to an extent never witnessed before in human history. In modern democracy, there is no small profit. All means are valid to deprive you of the value of your work. This is an institutionalized theft made possible by all the lies that, repeated often enough, become your reality, become your truth. Lies about climate change and the cause thereof, justifying 500 to 800% taxes on energy. Lies about your health, justifying security taxes and or mandatory health insurances. Lies about your diet, keeping you chronically ill and keeping the pharmaceutical and healthcare industries profitable. Lies about so-called free education to dispossess you of your children's education so that the state can profit and create a compliant workforce for their money-making machine. Lies, lies, and more lies whenever there is a financial interest at stake. In democracy, especially in politics, when more than 4 people agree, it is because they are lying to you to protect their financial interests or other interests. This is all echoed in the traditional media or mainstream media or fake news media, call them however you wish, which can no longer fulfill their traditional function because their primary sources of revenue are state subsidies, meaning they are controlled by the state. Whoever pays the piper calls the tune. Sounds obvious. Those who tell the stories control society. Citizen, the people, must make politicians understand that it is in the state's interest to rethink and simplify government structures from the ground up. The only way to do this is by rewriting our constitutions and making their rules absolutely unassailable. Regarding state revenues, politicians must become disciplined managers similar to private company managers with a clearly defined limited budget. States can no longer adjust revenues to their expenses. They are required to adapt their expenses to their revenues. The state's budget must be defined as a percentage of the value created by all citizens and legal entities, and indeed all economic actors in the nation, irrespective of their legal structure. This percentage is defined in the Constitution and is known to everyone with complete transparency. Politicians are held to the financial discipline imposed by the Constitution. The state cannot take more than 17% of the wealth produced by the nation, all revenue sources combined, regardless of the form of taxes of their levies. They must use this amount wisely to provide all the administrative, legal, and material infrastructure that gives citizens the ability to create value through their work. If political leaders stroke administrators do not respect their budget, they are dismissed without compensation. They must leave public service, and they are ineligible for life. They are considered poor administrators, and they are returned to the private sector employment market. Economic analysis shows that 17% is the optimal percentage of the total value produced by a country to be allocated to the state. This leaves citizens with 83% in purchasing power of the value of their work. Citizens are required to save 9% in mandatory individual solidarity saving health, Miss H, 9% for their children in mandatory individual solidarity savings education, Miss E, and 5% for their mandatory individual solidarity savings retirement, Miss R. A grand total of 23% in contributions from the value generated by their work. Thus, citizens will have 60% of their total income available immediately in purchasing power. In summary, 17% of your salary is taken by the state as a tax. Then 23%, i.e. 9% plus 9% plus 5%, are placed in escrow accounts in your name. The money remains yours. It is your capital. You can only use it for medical care from health professionals, for your children's education from professional educators, and for your retirement. Any misuse of your mandatory individual solidarity saving MIS for purpose other than those intended is punishable by community service and, in extreme cases, guardianship. The single tax 17% model to fund administrative functions and other state responsibilities has already proven itself on a very large scale. Hong Kong, for instance, was for decades a hub of the world's economy, arguably the most efficient, dynamic, and productive economic zone on the planet. It's a fact. Everything was made in Hong Kong when I was a kid. That's long ago, by the way. Their tax system was disarmingly simple. You paid a fixed percentage of all your earnings. For a long time, this percentage was 14%, and then it rose to 17%. In other words, if one year you earned Hong Kong dollar 100,000, you paid 17,000 Hong Kong dollar in taxes, and that is it. The cost of tax collection is reduced 100 times. Your tax return is completed in less than a minute. No need for accountants. No need to waste your time with the paper pushing empire that states imposes upon you in all our democracies. Work, educate your children, study, exercise, but please use your time to do what you love, to do what is good for you, good to your family, for your friends and your community. Refuse to waste your time on sterile bureaucratic paperwork that states imposes upon you. Refuse the nonsensical complexity of what they force you to do. Remember that the time you spend in good health on this earth is your most precious asset. It is unacceptable to waste your time on stressful and useless administrative procedures that serve those who steal the fruits of your labor, who steal your life to maintain their power and to control you. If you accept losing even an hour of your life, it means you have not understood its value. Intelligent politicians know that simple solutions exist, but they refuse to test them. They cultivate this complexity that gives inertia to the system and makes you believe that it is immutable, that it is just the way it is, that you cannot change anything. They must prevent you from having time on your hands. You might start thinking, and you could reach the same conclusions as me. Simple solutions, win-win deals are available to you. You must demand that they be proposed, tested, and implemented now, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. I repeat it, now. You want them now. It is intuitively easy to understand that when you have 83% of the wealth created by your activities, you are all the more motivated to work, to take care of your health, and to get involved in the compulsory education of your children, to cite just 3 examples. Giving you back your purchasing power means giving you back your responsibilities, your duties, and your rights. It gives you the desire and the capacity to undertake, to innovate, to create the new goods and services essential to the evolution of our way of life on this planet. As the saying goes, the only money well spent is the one that comes out of your wallet. The wealth created by free citizens is incomparable to what can be created by the enslaved citizens of our current democracies. By taking only 17% in taxes, it will only take a few years for governments to generate revenues that surpass those they have currently, those that they currently collect through institutionalized theft. Meaning, in 2024, the enslaved people that we are cannot contribute their full value to the common good. A slave does not think about innovating, undertaking, and creating the world of tomorrow. He survives by trying to escape as much as possible from the constraints of his master, who steal the value of his work, who steal his freedom, who steal his quality of life, and the future of his children. This is the world in which you live in 2024. How much longer will you accept this? When will you wake up? One of the main sources of state revenues are the central banks, who set interest rates and print currency, creating inflation and devaluing your money. Although, in most jurisdictions, central banks are supposed to be independent of political power, in practice, they work closely together because ultimately politicians hold the power. It is a tricky relationship because most politicians do not understand anything about economics, and even less about finance, of course, that's without saying. Central bankers advise politicians. They try to explain the economic mechanisms that justify their actions. And most of the time, politicians have no choice but to rely on these professionals, in inverted commas. But the state needs money to fund its disastrous management. And although they understand very little, the politicians know that they have an inexhaustible source of liquidity. They use their power over the central banks to finance themselves by running the banknote printing press continuously for 2 centuries. In fact, they have been stealing from you for these 2 centuries, but it is only in recent decades that the machine is running totally out of control. I will simplify the role of central bank for you hereafter and explain to you why they were useful and why in 2024 they are no longer useful as a tool to ensuring monetary value stability or as a sound and equitable financial management tool, or even as a tool to guarantee the nation's monetary exchanges. The first central bank, named a public bank, was established in 1609 in Amsterdam, Holland. But it was the Bank of England, founded in 1694, that first played the role of a central bank. It was not until 1803 that the Bank of France was established, and only in 1914 did the Americans set up the Federal Reserve, known as the Fed. The original idea behind central banks was to create liquidity for the states to manage crises, such as a war. If the nation needed to rapidly manufacture weapons for defense purposes and the state did not have sufficient liquidity or time to raise taxes, then it would raise the necessary funds from the central bank. A second scenario could be an economic growth crisis that requires liquidities to allow businesses and citizens to borrow and to rapidly build industrial production tools, goods, services, houses necessary for the development of our economies. The original idea is commendable, of course. It provides a simple and immediate solution to boost economic exchanges during a crisis. The problem today is that central banks were created for another time, for another era, for less efficient and less understood economies. Due to a lack of experience, we could not anticipate at the time of their creation the catastrophic effects that central banks and their capacity to create money out of nothing would have on our economies over the long term. A further issue, excuse me. How long do you think it took the politicians and central bankers to realize that printing unlimited money gave them absolute power over the nation and all its citizens? The answer is they knew before the first central bank was even created. This is why the first attempt to establish a central bank in the United States in 1791 was only approved by Congress on a temporary basis for a short mandate period, as it was considered unconstitutional. Certain politicians of that time were more ethical than those operating in 2024, apparently. They understood that centralizing monetary power in the hands of a small group of individuals would create an unacceptable imbalance on a national scale. In fact, they would artificially enrich the wealthiest, the capital holders, at the expense of the middle class, at the expense of the working class, the only creators of real value via their labor. After the War of 1812, America was in chaos. And to restore order, a second attempt to create a central bank in the US was made in 1816. The creation was approved to end the ongoing crisis, but only for a 20-year period. This mandate effectively ended in 1836. The reason for this short mandate was to restore balance once the crisis was over, to restore an equity of power among all the economic actors of the nation. In fact, to make us all equal before the value of money, just as we are supposed to be equal before the law. Some political leaders of the time, keen to give the United States of America a future, understood that the only nations with a chance of success are those where all humans are equal before the law, and most importantly, equal before the value of money. I would even add, equal before the taxes. But that is for later. But you can easily imagine that those who have the opportunity to create money out of nothing for 20 years want to retain that power, to keep what is, for them, the easy solution, the miracle solution to get out of all bad situations. It is an absolute immunity that allows them to erase their management errors with the wave of a hand, and allows them to finance cronyism in all important sectors of human activity. What you would call today lobbying. This is at the citizen's expense, because I remind you, when you print money, You are stealing from the citizens by reducing the value of their savings without having to answer to anyone and without doing any work. This led to violent political struggles between the scammers who wanted to use this power for personal enrichment and others who were more ethical or moral, if you wish, conscious of their responsibility to give the nation the structures that ensures its success. The seventh American president, Andrew Jackson, 1767 to 1845, totally opposed to the very concept of a central bank outside of a crisis, went so far as to have engraved on his tombstone, "I killed the bank." This is to his credit, because a true politician, a true leader who plays his role, knows that the nation with a future are those where all men are equal before the law, before taxation, and before the value of money. If you give a small group of humans the power to create money at will, based on their needs of the moment, it is obvious that they will use it. Would you expect a lion not to use its power, its strength, to kill a gazelle? When you give a group of humans the power to self-finance without working, to dominate everyone else by controlling the value of your money, and therefore the value of your savings, are you foolish enough to think they will not use it for themselves, of course, at your expense? QED. I say no more. The only constant on a universal scale is change. Imposing old structures or habits on your children is criminal, because those structures and habits were created for another time. You must accept change. Change is not your enemy, but your indispensable ally. Only the death of a system allows its rebirth. We must demand to have a complete restructuring of the way currencies are currently being managed. We must learn from the mistakes of the past. We must learn from the experience that we have gained. We must use our current understanding of the monetary mechanism. We must use the technologies available to us in 2024. Money is a tool of exchange provided by the state to citizens and all economic actors. Money is not an instrument of power at the service of politicians. It belongs to the citizens and never to the states. We must demand that the total money supply of a specific country must be calculated according to an average of M2 and M3. Please refer to Chapter 11, Constitutional Articles, paragraph 10. So we must calculate the money supply according to an average of M2 and M3 and adjusted once a year on January 31st based on the country's economic growth or decline. We must demand that money be made available to users through a blockchain technology similar to that applied to cryptocurrencies. Money should never should be excuse me money should be available in electronic and scriptural form, in bills and in coins at all times, at the user's discretion. The erosion of monetary value by inflation is replaced by a new equilibrium in money supply, which results from the number of users who trust the value of the currency, free from any and all political constraints. The value of consumer goods adjusts upwards and downwards to the value of the currency through the simple rules of supply and demand. The requirement for the central bank disappears, along with the requirement for all the state's technocratic and political paraphernalia that go with them. The goal is to create upstream a safeguard to protect against dishonest behavior and those who have centralized the power to create money in their own hands. The first states to implement an efficient currency, which is owned by all the state's citizens rather than by the state's politicians and technocrats, will gain such an economic advantage that all other nations will have to follow suit. The reason is simple. Look, universities teach economics students that 90% of the value of a currency is determined or supported, if you wish, by three things. One, the labor of the citizens. Two, the country's infrastructures. Three, tangible assets. All of this is true. But in reality, those three criteria account for only 10% or at the most 20% of the currency's value. This is the tree that hides the forest. They want to hide the simple truth from you. The primary criteria, which accounts for 90% of the value of a currency, is the number of users who trust it. It is the number of people who have chosen to use it as a means of exchanging goods and services. It is the number of people who trust it as a refuge in which to store the value of their hard work over the long term, without the risk of erosion due to inflation. We'll get there. In fact, the trust of citizens is the only criteria, the one that weighs 90% on the value of any currency. Anyone who tries to prove otherwise is either an ignorant person suffering from complexitatis bias, who has understood nothing, or a liar who needs this complexity to hide the simplicity of the problem in order to protect their financial interests and maintain control over you. Imagine a state like Switzerland, Russia, China, or the USA making available to all the economic actors in their nation and indirectly to the world a currency based on blockchain technology, backed by simple and stable rules, particularly regarding the increase in the money supply. This new currency would have all the citizens of the country as captive users, unlike the cryptocurrencies of 2024, which depend solely on voluntary users. The state would also provide a legal and constitutional guarantee. Its value would no longer be at risk of fluctuation due to political factors serving interests other than those of its users. It would have all the nation's citizens as as the foundation of the number of people using it. And for the first time, the value of this currency would be truly determined by the laws of supply and demand, just like any other services. I assure you, money is nothing more than a service provided to citizens to facilitate exchanges and to store the value of your labor. You will finally regain that which states have the duty to provide to you, an efficient monetary service which is your property, which serves your interests and which serves the interests of wealth creators rather than the interests of the minority that govern you. The first states to give their blockchain currency one, a state guarantee, two, a legal and constitutional stability, three, millions of citizens as captive users from day one. Those states will offer a massive competitive advantage over cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin today. Once again, the logic is simple and irrefutable. The value of the 2024 cryptocurrencies rests solely on the number of users who choose to trust them and use them at their own risk. Their attractiveness and strength come from the fact that they obey only their own rules. They are autonomous, ideally without political constraints and in principle without legal constraints. Their weaknesses and therefore the risks they pose are: one, they have no captive users; two, they have no state, legal or constitutional stability; three, and by far the greatest danger, they are in competition with state currencies. From the day they become a threat to the state's power, to its control over your money, your leaders will impose laws that make their use punishable by imprisonment. This is what happens when you no longer decide anything, when the people can no longer determine what is good for them. This is the exact opposite of a democracy in which demos kratos, the people decide. Therefore, the cryptocurrencies of 2024 are under constant threat of seeing their value annihilated by the legal arsenal with which states have equipped themselves, and of seeing their users flee because they are not captive. These cumulative risks make them highly speculative financial products whose value depends on one, and only one criterion: the perception of their users. It is all the more tragic because all the informed people who have studied the question have come to the same conclusion. Digital currencies based on a blockchain are the future. They are the only impartial solution available today that will make us equal before the value of money, as we are supposed to be equal before the law and in the near future before fiscality. The use of these currencies will evolve with large scale usage and the experience gained. But it is your duty to constitutionally impose them, to offer them as a gift to your children, a gift to the states, and a gift to the global economy. This will only come from you because states will never relinquish the control they have over currencies. They will never give up what they know to be an inexhaustible financial windfall, and thus an essential source of their power. To let go, states must be forced to so do by the will of their citizens, by the will of the people. A 7-year-old child easily understands this, but technocrats do not. They are so entrenched in the inertia of their thinking, so formatted in their worldviews, that they are incapable of understanding that implementing this new monetary structure is in fact in their own interest, in the interest of the state, in the interest of the nation and the economy. In fact, high above the interest of citizens. I said in the interest of the states because if you think about it, they will be the prime beneficiaries even before your children or any other economic actor. All educated politicians or those with a project for the nation are they are in charge of, or who are simply honest with themselves and with you, know that sooner or later they will have to give back to the citizens what belongs to the citizens, to relinquish the stranglehold they have on the value of your money. Initially, they must accept that this will deprive them of a source of power, to give it back to the sole sovereign, the people, and to the actors who have significant weight on the economy. All areas of human activity where there is a large volume of exchange, such as energy, commodities in general, food and beverage, pharmaceuticals, and many others, are concerned about potential instability of the value of money, more than they are concerned by the instability of the legal framework. It's a much greater short-term risk, let's face it. If all these financial players have at their disposal a currency whose value is based on the trust of hundreds of millions of captive users, is based on a solid legal and constitutional stability, they will want to use it on a global scale to protect the value of their transactions and assets. As soon as a state currency based on a blockchain is supported by the trust of hundreds of millions of users, but also by the labor of the citizens of that state, by the infrastructures and by tangible assets of the issuing nation, success will be guaranteed. All economic players who understand international finance, who manage their companies well, will want to use the stability of this currency in priority over all others because it will reduce risk exposure. Unfortunately, the number of politicians capable of understanding and implementing this simple logic, which I have summarized in the last few paragraphs in less than 10 minutes, are few and far between. They are so entrenched in what they consider immutable that they cannot see 3 or 4 moves ahead in the game and anticipate the result. They are by definition timid, fearful. They have no confidence in themselves. They have no project other than their own short-term interest to stay in power and abuse their unlimited access to your money. It is tragic because it would take only a few educated people who are experienced in finance and who possess the courage to do what is in the interest of all. And it's a done deal. How is it that politicians do not put the state's long-term interest first? They are not stupid. On the contrary, is it our education system that forces them to apply processes rather than think, rather than make connections, rather than be intelligent? It is true that when you apply a process, when you follow a procedure that you learned at school or university, you stop being intelligent. You stop being creative. You replace your personal reflection with your formatting. You will never do anything other than add inertia to the legacy of the past. You will never build the future. From a philosophical and ethical point of view, you are a criminal because you impose the structures of the past on our children today. You prevent them to change. You forbid them to propose and to test the simple and logical solutions on which the future will be built. Mm. At the beginning, the value of this new currency will undergo significant fluctuations because it depends upon supply and demand. If a large number of people want to use it for their commercial exchanges, its value will increase. Of course, safeguards that prevent the abuses of the past decades will be put in place, but it will be easy because once the rules are well established and understood by all, they cannot be transgressed, particularly the calculation of the money supply based upon an average of M2 or M3 or both together. This simple system will replace all the interminable intellectual masturbation so prevalent in today's financial world. Once more, in a complex situation, you must come up with simple ideas. It is the same principle as in all sectors of human activity: finance, constitutional framework, legal framework, justice. I would add health, communication. Every sector of human activities must be managed by professionals in their own fields. We must absolutely give back responsibilities to the professionals in all area of professional human activity. Always remember that an excess of laws is the greatest of injustice, that individuals who cultivate this complexity are those who use it to impose their dictatorship upon you. In 2024, the technocrats who manage the monetary system and the opportunists who profit from it do not respect one of the most fundamental rules of the evolution of life. When nature has a simple solution, it does not choose a complicated one. This is the model we must follow. The human structures that we have created from scratch, the rules that unite us, that make us the most extraordinary collaborative species on the earth that the earth has ever seen, must be simplified to make them accessible and useful to all. Central banks are a totally obsolete construct that only serve a small number of individuals who are strategically placed to benefit from them. Central banks serve the states that use them to create inflation, the most unfair tax, because it allows them to steal your savings without even having to send you a tax bill. They serve the banking system and the largest corporations whose managers are the advisors of the politicians by giving them unlimited access to the value of your money. They serve to deprive you your access to property via obligatory interest rates rather than via a free market managed by professional lenders. They serve to keep you under control. They never serve you, the citizen. They do not serve the people. Central banks are redundant. They are an obstacle to your freedom. They steal the value of your money. They are an obstacle to the concept of private property. They are totally unconstitutional. They must disappear immediately. If you had honest individuals at the head of the states, not necessarily educated or intelligent people, merely honest ones, they would have proposed these changes to you years ago. Because understanding what I have simply explained in a few minutes requires no exceptional talent of intelligence. It is within the reach of a 7-year-old child. But as long as politicians continue to be elected, you will never have honest people at the head of the states. You will only find there power megalomaniacs. It is your choice. We'll come back to this a bit further. Better to have a terrible end than a horror without end. The endless horror is what we have been living through for the last 4 decades minimum. Our politics, our constitutions, our legal frameworks are in bankruptcy. They are so poorly managed that the state continually abuses its power to create money to deal with the successive crises which it has the sole responsibility to solve. We move from one war to another, from financial crash to another economic disaster. The debt we bequeath to our children is monstrous. Education of our youth is pitiful. Everything we learn about health is a lie. Private property is just a myth. All this must stop now. It must stop today. Not in a week, not in a month, not in a year. It is our duty to make it stop today. Populations are unhappy. Even worse, people are sad. They have lost their joy of living. They no longer greet each other. Even if it is in horror, we must bring an end to our current system so that it can be reborn. We must bankrupt our democracies for as short a period as possible to limit damage, but we must do it. We must rewrite the framework. We must rebuild new constitutional and legal foundations. We must restore their strength to put them back in the service of citizens, of humanity, of the planet, at the service of you. The only way to have a real impact is to cut off the lifeblood, to dry up the financial flows that politicians feed upon. We must do it quickly, brutally, and coordinate in a coordinated manner, without violence, with order and dignity. We must impose our benevolent will, and since no one is offering us the constitutional means or legal tools to force the system to evolve, we will use Mahatma Gandhi's social non-cooperation. We will use the lying flat or the let it rot of our Chinese friends. Once again, non-violence is necessary, or more like, no violence is necessary or even permitted in the scope of our social non-cooperation SNC action. Weapons are totally prescribed, nor are they even an option under any circumstances. Social non-cooperation is an inclusive action. It aims to allow everyone to play their role in the construction of the human political, social, and economic edifice in which we choose to live together. You will not seek to punish anyone. You will not seek to take revenge for any wrong done to you. It is irrelevant. It has no value. You will not let the darkness of your past overshadow the threshold of your future. You will only be remembered for what you propose to build, for what you give. You will abstain from the violence that states used to control you. You will not lower yourself to the behaviors that you reprimand in others. you will realize that non-violence is the greatest power of strong man. You will remember that the victor of any war is the one that organizes peace. You will be that man. In fact, you already are that man. Please find all the details of your future action in chapter 11, chapter 12, excuse me for that, social non-cooperation, and 13, roadmap, the roadmap to recover the value of our democracies. Summary. Governments are shooting themselves in the foot. Take the example of a nation whose GDP, value of the work produced by its citizens and companies, is, say, 1,000 billion. At an overall tax rate of 40%, the state collects 400 billion of taxes. If the same state decides to take a levy of 17% of the GDP, it will only collect 170 billion in the first year. But it will only take 5 years for the state to do much better and exceed this initial collection amount. The reasons for this are the following. A. Citizens produce more value when they finally work for themselves and not for the protection of the state administrations as they do today. They regain their motivation to undertake, to create companies, to invent the products and services of tomorrow. They retain the product of their work to reinvest in the growth of their businesses. B. Citizens regain their purchasing power. They boost consumption and thus the real economy. C. The cost of state administration is reduced by threefold, fourfold minimum, and directly channeling these amounts back into the real economy. D. The state has a defined budget. It must return 3/4 of its personnel to the open labor market. The civil servants who work for the state today are highly qualified people who must, once again, become profit centers that the private economy feeds upon, rather than remaining state cost centers as they are today. E. The state must decentralize. It must give back to the professionals the responsibilities that are due to them, such as in the sector of education, health, transport, infrastructure, energy, among so many others. F. By returning responsibilities to the professionals in all human activity sectors, states no longer need to maintain expertise in areas that are not their own. So obvious. G. The natural competition generated between the successful and the less successful actors in all fields of activity is stronger, which increases the quality of services and reduces costs. H. All administrative procedures are thus simplified, including tax and duty collection. They effectively cost nothing, and most importantly, They free up precious time for the citizens. I only mentioned a few main points, but you'll understand that the list is endless. You must force a governance system to return to a sound management, a simple management, accessible and understandable by your 7-year-old child. It is up to you to impose this. It is up to politicians to implement this, to restore the state's strength in the service of all citizens. Enough of explanations. You've understood my point. Thank you very much for your attention. And please find here below constitutional articles 3 and 10, state budget and state monetary discipline. You would find these, as well as all the other constitutional foundations that we need to restore strength to our democracies, at your service, at the service of the only sovereign, the people. Thank you for your benevolent and kind attention. Peace out.